Thank you, and thank you, Leader Driscoll, for your leadership in a very, very, very complicated area. I think what we saw today is a continuation of erosion of consumer coverages, right? We've had hope for the last 4 legislative sessions that I've been participating in the process as an outsider as we continued to gut coverage and got access to the courts and change our statutes every single year. The last 4 years that we've dealt with property insurance, and in this most recent property insurance, they've promised hope, yet no relief has been received. So we can't continue to guarantee and listen to the words of hope. We need to see those relief, and I don't believe this bill will provide that.
That parts of this bill are actually damaging to the Florida homeowner. What components that was just passed today and that will likely be signed up by the governor do you think are actually damaging for policyholders?
So I think anytime you damage or take away consumers' access to have representation, that's going to be a huge damage. I pointed it out in my closing that this new language carries a burden of proof that is shifted onto the homeowner to prove now an exclusion in an 80 to 110 page policy. You can't prove a burden of proof without an attorney. And those cases where somebody has, a single family home or lives in a condominium and their policy is relatively small, but that money means absolutely everything to him or her. Their home is their number one investment. They need somebody to help them through a really complicated process. And sadly, so many homeowners are going to be left to navigate this on their own without representation, while insurance companies have offices filled with lawyers ready to go, ready to fight for them, while a lot of homeowners are going to be on their own.
Regarding state regulators, are you satisfied with the job that OIR and DFS have done on this topic over the years? Have you gotten the answers you need or have asked?
Absolutely not. And I pointed it out yesterday in the Commerce Committee as our insurance commissioner sat there for 4 hours listening to amendments that our caucus filed that I was able to present that talked about more transparency in that department, more transparency to the public about the data that he receives. And he sat there for 4 hours and did not avail himself of the podium. And I had a lot of questions to ask him, and we all should have a lot of questions to ask him about the job that he's been doing. But I don't think he'll be there much longer, and we'll see him more likely than not as an executive of an insurance company, because he has just delivered to them every wish list that they have asked him to deliver. And it's why when Senate Bill 76 was put into effect, the legislature put in data calls and requirements that he was supposed to make available. That's still not available today. And there's a reason why that data is not being made available, because once we scrutinize it and once we look into it, I think we're going to start to see that there was a scheme to defraud. There was a scheme to put together to force litigation up. Because if litigation's up and there's a boogeyman, and we've heard year after year after year, it's always a different boogeyman. And our insurance commissioner has never held them accountable. So today we gave him more money. We gave that department more money to investigate. Well, when was the last time he used that money to investigate anything? To investigate any of their conduct? He hasn't. So he has not done his job. And that is one of the reasons why this market is failing, because he's not transparent. He's not producing the data that's requested and asked for him to do his job. And he sits in a Commerce Committee where we're talking about the job that he's been doing for 4 hours, stands up at the last 5 minutes and tells us where his office is. I personally don't. So when we talk about it's arbitration, but when we talk about, that's okay. When we talk about arbitration, right? Arbitration is a trial without a jury. And in order to comply with arbitration, there are rules. And those rules are complicated for lawyers to understand, right? Those rules require an understanding of evidence. Those rules require a presentation of witnesses. And now when you talk about burden shifting on something called on causation of how a loss occurred, that requires experts. These arbitrations are going to cost thousands of dollars for consumers to get to the table, and they can't navigate this process by themselves. They're gonna have to hire a lawyer to get to arbitration. And I didn't get to mention it in my closing, but I currently in my office have many cases where I am learning New York law to arbitrate on behalf of Floridians. So that is absolutely something that is happening, and it's going to get worse because we saw no promise today by the Republicans that we are going to hold our insurance commissioner to make sure that Floridians, Florida law applies, Florida venue applies.
And ask you, enough of a critical mass of